Greetings from the Sephardic temple of Cedarhurst. Let's examine a verse from Isaiah that will be read in tomorrow's Haftarah. It forms the core of a midrash that is recited each day during the Shachrit prayer service. Rabbi Elazar said in the name of Rabbi Hanina, "The sages increase peace throughout the world, as it says in Isaiah, and all your children shall be disciples of God, and great shall be the peace of your children. Do not read your children, rather your builders." To understand this midrash, we must take it apart and see each part in its own context. First, we have the foundation of the midrash, namely our verse from Isaiah. God communicates to the people of Israel, exiled in Babylonia, "You have experienced trials and tribulations, but do not fear. The future that is in store for you is rich in security and contentment." The language of this verse, "V'chol banayich limudei Hashem, v'rav shalom banayich," and all your children shall be disciples of God, and great shall be the peace of your children. Here Isaiah is likely meditating on the Shema. "V'limadtem otam epenechem ledaber bam." You shall teach them Torah and mitzvot to your children. And there are so many other places in Moses' Torah, especially in the book of Deuteronomy, where parents are told to teach Torah to their children. "V'limadtem otam et benechem." We can understand that in Isaiah's attempt to comfort the people, all of whom are familiar with this idea of "V'limadtem otam et benechem," he would tell the people of Israel, look, the future is really great. Zion will no longer be abandoned. Jerusalem will once again be a city of beauty. You will have comfort from all your suffering of exile and depression and devastation. All your children will become God's disciples, and their study of Torah will bring about Rav Shalom, great peace. So that's the verse in the context of the prophet Isaiah. Let's now see how the sages chose to understand that verse in this midrash. Like the prophet before him, Rabbi Elazar is also looking at his generation and sees symptoms of despair. Over 1700 years ago, Jewish life in the land of Israel was exceedingly difficult. In his attempt to comfort the people, in a similar way to prophet Isaiah and how he had done that 850 years prior, Rabbi Elazar is bringing a message of hope. In essence, Rabbi Elazar is saying, what we want is for everyone to have shalom. That is the aim of the sages, always for everyone to have peace. But in his generation, Rabbi Elazar doesn't see it possible for all Jews to be disciples of God. There's too much turbulence and despair. So he teaches, don't understand the verse from Isaiah to refer to all Jews. That's impossible right now due to the political, social, and cultural and economic situation in the land of Israel in the year 285 of the Common Era. We don't have enough resources to enable all Jews to be disciples of God. But what I can tell you is that the whole community will indeed experience shalom when all the rabbis, who are called Talmidei Chachamim, disciples of the sages, who are the Bonayich, the builders of Torah teaching, when all the rabbis are all disciples of God, then the whole community of Israel will have shalom. V'rav shalom bonayich. Ultimately, it is a hopeful message, even if it's a little sad to recognize that not all the children of that era could become disciples of God. In a real way, we see this impossibility as well, from both ends of the spectrum. We know of children who become so assimilated and removed from Torah that they no longer believe in the mission of transmitting any Jewish values from one generation to the next. And it is as if they are lost to the Jewish people. And this causes great pain to Jewish parents when this happens. On the other end of the spectrum, We know of people who send their children to Israel to learn in yeshiva, and these children come home extremists. These children have been brainwashed. Instead of the wholesome, vivifying Torah, they are indoctrinated to be literalists. They are filled by their yeshiva teachers with dogma instead of true learning. And while they may be very careful indeed to marry other Jews, these children are really lost because they separate themselves from all Jews who don't look like them, talk like them, or act like them. In both instances, these children are not disciples of God. So what's the answer? I believe the answer is for each parent to become the best disciple that they can be, to live their faith undaunted by the actions of their children who have gone astray to either end, and maybe they will be able to be an example to the third generation. For we all know stories of grandparents who, because they gently increased their own understanding of Torah and mitzvot, they became powerful examples for their grandchildren of a non-extreme path of Torah. So in a real way, this message is a very hopeful one, that each one of us can ultimately have a huge impact, if not upon our children, then maybe upon our children's children. From Moses to Isaiah, all the way down to the sages of the Talmud, the goal is always shalom banayich, to have a life that is not turbulent, to experience life without debilitating crisis, for people to be at peace with one another, and also just as important, to have peace for oneself. Oftentimes, when people are not at peace with themselves, they are incapable of having peace with others. Another important way to read this midrash is with the awareness that it also might be a slight dig at the leaders of Rabbi Elazar's generation. He looked around and saw that there were plenty of Torah scholars that were not up to the best standards. And yet, the prophecy of Isaiah is promising that all of the Banayich shall be disciples of God. Therefore, Rabbi Elazar is saying, perhaps to his generation, hey, let's do a better job of generating leadership that is moving forward instead of being extreme. May God draw us near to become his disciples. May God grant us insight, and may our actions, large and small, lead to bountiful measures of peace for us and for the entire world. Amen. For those of us who are looking forward to the Meldados this Shabbat, commemorating an Anyo and a Hala or a Yortzeit of a loved one, and have not registered for the service tomorrow, we will once again recite the Hashkabot memorial prayers today on Ereb Shabbat. Our intention is to bring honor to the deceased, consolation to all who mourn, and to strengthen the hearts of all who remember. We also will recite a prayer for those who are in need of healing. Tov Shem Yishem and Tov Yom HaMaved Miyom Nivalado Sof Davar Kol Nishma Et HaElohim Yirah B'Mitzvotav Shemor Ki Zeh Kol Ha'adam V'nuchad Nechona B'Shiva L'Yonah Tachat Kanfei HaShechina Sham Tehei Menat Mechitzat V'Shivat Nefesh Hashem HaTov Shemuel Hayim Elias V'gam Shemuel ben Tevel Slapian Yitzchak ben Yisrael Sobel Shemuel ben Sevi Hirsch Quenzel Moshe ben Harav Matzliach Yitzchak Matzel Yaakov Moshe Russo Avraham ben Shraga Feivel Shram Binyamin Moshe Elias Yaakov Menachem Baker Yaakov Shemuel Mavora Meir ben Avraham Davis Simcha ben Binyamin Goldblatt Solomon Levy Raphael Aharon Kamai Avraham ben Leib Lurio Jack Lurio Roberto David Bihar Vitali Guagil Aharon Cohen Chaim M. Russo, Oro M. Sarfati, Carlo Albenda, Albert Alfasa, Edward Besso, Louis Calderon, Jacob Calderon, Isaac Meir Calderon, Sidney Cohen, Rabbi Chaim Danhi, Chaim Victor Danhi, Sanford Daniels, Shalom Gormazano, Jacob Hannock, Issy Kamai, Al Levy, Peretz Rosenfeld, Ilya Shabadash, Harav Avraham Dov ben Aharon Verisha Marins, David ben Bela Betesh, Tevel ben Sima Slepian, Shraga ben Noach Hadassah Rosen, Reuven ben Arthur Ruth Bluestein, Shemuel ben Moshe Russo, Chaim Yecheskel Shraga ben Yitzchak Yaakov, Eliyahu Daniel Susi, Binyamin Teleki ben Pesach, Yehuda Gold ben Avraham Rachel Leah, Yom Tov ben Moshe Kamai, Yitzchak ben Gabriel Babaganov, Eliezer ben Avraham Beula Kraus, Aharon ben Avraham Cohen, Aharon Simcha ben Avraham Johnson, Shlomo ben Shemuel Mavora, Ruach Adonai Tinyechem Began Eden, Hamelech Berachamav Yechos V'Yachmol Aleichem V'Levei Eleihem HaShalom V'Mishkabam Yeh HaShalom Hem V'chol B'nei Yisrael HaShochim B'Yimahem B'Chlal HaRachamim V'Hasalichot V'chein Yehi Ratzon V'Nomar Amen. Eishechayim Yimsa V'Rachok Mipeninim Mikra Tenula Miperi Adeha V'Yalu Rabba She'arim Ma'aseha Rachmana D'Rachmanuta Dilehi Yimalama Al Kadmohi Duchan HaIsha HaNichbedet Rachel Siegel Bat Yitzchak V'Gam Rivka Yitzchak Asel Ben Venuta Modiano Bat Chaim Ann Kasuto Mina Avraham Hazen Sarah Yaakov Mavora Leah Bat Eliyahu Davis Tilly Traeger Rosa Moshe David Sarah Gittel Bat Cherna Friedman Allegra Isaac Crespi Maria Maya Rofe Esther Barokas Rebecca J. Cohen Luna Bar David Molly Becker Fortunata Mazeltov Kodron Sylvia Friedman Evelyn Levy Jacobson Esther Mizrahi Sarah Rivka Adwar Gladys Sadakario Regina Sadaka Rachel Schulman Malkula Zaphos Luna Clara Bachaim Rivka Jamil Basha Granite Bat Moshe Arya Bebela Millie Bat Ezra Sarah Harari Sarah Letterman Bat Yaakov V'Miriam Rachel Bat Shimon Esther Peso Esha Chaim Halia Amalia Aranya Bat Eliyahu B'Sarah Sarah Bauman Bat Shlomo B'Chana Elias Sarah Gershon Maya Esther Lampert Bat Vilvolder Elka Matrana Bat Mordechai Vida Keisler Bat Yosef V'Suku Kasuto Yosefa Kleinstein Bat Yitzchak Ba'aida Cyril Beja Bat Avraham B'Sarah Sarah Kabaso Bat Feivel Ruach Adonai Tinichem Began Eden Hamelech Berachamav Yechos V'Yachmol Aleichem V'Levei Eleihem HaShalom V'Mishkaban Yehi HaShalom Hein V'chol Benot Yisrael HaShochavot Imahen V'Chlal HaRachamim V'Hasalichot V'chein Yehi Ratzon V'Nomar Amen. Misha Beirach Avotenu Abraham Yitzchak V'Yakov Sarah Rivka Rachel V'Leah Hu Yivarech Et HaCholim Dan ben Sarah Rosen V'Gam Shemuel Aharon Fuhrer Yitzchak ben Chana Aloni Yaakov ben Najia Chaim ben Meir V'Hillel Chaim ben Meir Hillel V'Dona Goldsmith Zahava Bat Avraham V'Simcha Eshet Rachamim Franco Devorah Maya Bat Masha Michal Freda Beja Bat Rachel Clara Bat Kolchava Katriel Bar Hana Sukastein Bat Rezel Yosef ben Yaakov Rachel Esther Bat Aida Rachel Penina Bat Devorah Esther Sarah Feldman Bat Baruch Lechana Yisrael Pinchas ben Chaim Shapiro V'Gam Ishto Rachel Regal Shalom Blaustein Bat Etalea Miriam Kraus Bat Pinchas V'Yantel Esther Marcus Bat Chaim V'Malka Herschel Bauman Shlomo ben Chana Eliyahu Yocheved Hand Bat Runya Fremet Joya Persily Bat Moshe V'Klara Elka Shendel Winkler Bat Sura Fega Rivka Bat Hana Shemuel Reuven ben Esther Baruch Eliezer ben Gila Abraham ben Fortuna Sayeg Elon Nesher ben Rivka, Meir ben Avraham, Avraham ben Sarah Visser, Or ben Vered Varon Masarano, Leah Lind bat Solika, Jackie Perazzo, Shulamit Cohen bat Rachel, Yerachmiel ben Shemuel Samaya, Sima Basha Bafego Gittel, David ben Rivka, Nachama Eshe Kaleb Shemuel Russo, Rachel bat Zimbulyani, Devora bat Chana et Russo, Ita bat Frida, Leah Chana bat Yeta. Hamakom Yishlach Lahem, Refuah Shlema, Refuata Nefesh, Refuata Guf. Elna, Refana Lahem, Vachliman, Vachziram Le'etanam, V'cheni Hiratzon, Benomar, Amen. O Lord, we also pray for the victims who have perished during this coronavirus pandemic and for their survivors. May your compassion and love be upon them all. May you provide consolation for those who mourn. For those who are quarantined, either willingly or due to their having been infected, please, God, give them strength in their time of isolation and anxiety. Heal them and shield them from despair. May the Holy One bless first responders and medical personnel who risk their lives, and may God grant expertise and grace to all whose hearts, bodies, and minds are called into use for the sake of those who are infected. May God grant success to all members of our armed forces and law enforcement who work diligently to protect us from harm. Yehi ratzon milifnei Avinu Shabashamayim, la'atzor hamagefa me'alinu u'me'al kol olamo v'imru amen. May it be the will of our Father in heaven to avert disease and destruction from us and from his entire world, and let us say Amen. Boas and Tradas, Ereb Shabbat Shalom, from the Sephardic Temple of Cedarhurst.